Welcome to Keepers. I'm Matt Ufford, and this is my 2014 preseason fantasy football top 15 quarterback ranking and sleeper jamboree. But first, let's talk a little about quarterback value in fantasy drafts. Lately, it's become en vogue to wait until the middle rounds to draft a quarterback, but you shouldn't be afraid to draft a top QB early. They're actually less likely to bust than running backs or wide receivers drafted in the first 2 rounds. Of course, what I mean when I say top quarterback is Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, and Peyton Manning. They're the consensus top 3, and anyone who says otherwise is a charlatan or a Colts fan. While you'll be happy with any of these 3, Drew Brees is the top quarterback on my board for one reason. He has the lowest injury risk. And while he had some issues producing on the road last year, the Saints offense under Brees and Sean Payton has been so reliably high-powered for so long that he's going to be worth that mid to late second round pick. Rodgers is a close second to Brees for the same reason: consistency. Before his broken collarbone last year, Rodgers had finished either first or second in total fantasy points for 5 straight years. Don't worry about Eddie Lacy stealing yardage and touchdowns. The bigger effect will be opposing defenses respecting the run, freeing up play-action passes to Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb. Manning rounds out the top 3, and while he's coming off a historic season, I don't expect him to repeat those numbers against a schedule that includes the NFC West. The added injury risk and a Week 16 game at Cincinnati make him the least enticing option of the big 3. Now, there's a huge divide between that triumvirate and everyone else, but I think Andrew Luck takes the leap to 4th this year. Solid decision-making, an improved roster of receivers, and elite mouth breathing will push him into the top tier of fantasy QBs. Matt Stafford's just below him, and he'll either flirt with greatness or massively disappoint you depending on how puffy his face is. Cam Newton's fantasy points have gone down every year he's been in the pros, but his rushing stats should pick up this year with a fully healthy ankle. I'd love to say the same thing about his passing stats, but the Panthers seem intent on seeing just how much Newton can do without quality receivers. But they drafted Kelvin Benjamin. Yeah, settle down, Panthers fans. He's too raw to save the Panthers' pass attack single-handedly. Nick Foles will have a great season. I'd guess 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, 10 picks. He will also be drafted too early by someone in your league who thinks he can maintain last year's torrid pace. Now, I'm a Chip Kelly believer, but you're not going to see Foles get 9.1 yards per attempt this season. Matt Ryan is presently being punished in fantasy drafts this year for his teammates being injured last year. Don't fall for that. He was a top 5 fantasy quarterback in 2011 and 2012. With an ADP of around 80, he's an incredible 7th round value. Tony Romo gets no respect, and I get it. Maybe you don't like his dumb face or his stupid team or the way he throws critical interceptions, but he's wildly underrated as a fantasy QB. Even with the bad back, I think he keeps throwing up fantasy points in high-scoring losses for the Cowboys. Rounding out the top 10, Phillip Rivers finished as the 6th best quarterback in fantasy last year, and yet his ADP is 112. Even with some regression against a tougher schedule this year, you're still looking at a top 10 quarterback that you can get in the 10th or 11th round. That is sexy value. The NFC's mobile young guns are the next block. Russell Wilson and Colin Kaepernick are essentially equals in fantasy value. Kaepernick's the better runner, Wilson's probably less prone to mistakes, and neither throw it enough to warrant a start every week. RG3 hasn't scored a rushing touchdown since his rookie season and is playing for a coach who wants his quarterback to stay in the pocket. Now, I'll give him a bump in my rankings when he plays a full season. I like Jay Cutler a lot. He's never posted great per-game numbers, but I think a full season of Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey will give him his best fantasy season ever. Of course, he's going to have to stay healthy for a full season to do that. Still, he's a great QB too. And rounding out my top 15 is someone named Tom Bradby. Am I reading that right? Listen, Brady's a Hall of Famer, all-time great, blah, 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 but his passer rating has gone down in 3 consecutive years, and his value is tied almost completely to the health of a tight end who frequently gets injured. And once Gronk goes down, then what? Danny Amendola? Come on, Danny Amendola gets hurt if you say his name too loud. Watch this. Danny Amendola! Check the news, he just went down with a sports hernia. That rounds out the top 15 fantasy quarterbacks for 2014, but before I go, a couple other notes on quarterbacks. First of all, yes, Ben Roethlisberger is probably worthy of a top 15 spot, but I go out of my way to malign Steelers whenever possible. Plus, I don't like his big, stupid head. It's like God put stubble on the world's biggest potato. Also, if you're out there looking for deep sleepers, go with Ryan Tannehill or Josh McCown. If Tannehill picks up the new offense, he'll benefit from new OC Bill Lazor's version of Chip Kelly's attack. and McCann will be throwing to Vincent Jackson and Mike Evans, who are basically replicas of Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey. He'll do fine in Tampa. And finally, if you're in a dynasty league, put your money towards Teddy Bridgewater, not Johnny Manziel. Teddy will be cheaper and better in the long run. Maybe the short run, too. This concludes the quarterback episode of Keeper's pre-draft rankings. Check out SB Nation for the rest of my preseason positional rankings and more episodes of Keepers. I'm gonna do this all year. Get used to this set.